Have you ever felt that tightness in your chest? That rising fire you can't quite explain? Someone says the wrong thing, someone crosses your line, and there it is, the storm. But here's the question: should you speak, or should you stay silent? Eastern masters say, anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. But Nietzsche said, he who cannot control his wrath is no better than the slave who cannot rise. So, what's the truth? In this video, we dive into philosophy, emotion, and everyday reality to answer a timeless question: should I be angry or not? Part 1. The Stoic Fire, Mastering the Reaction. Let's begin with a simple truth. Anger feels powerful. It gives us a sense of control in moments when we feel powerless. It feels like we're finally taking a stand, refusing to be walked over, unheard, or unseen. But here's the paradox. Most of our anger is not about the present. It's about something older, a wound, a belief, a story we've been carrying. Seneca, a Stoic philosopher and advisor to emperors, didn't shy away from this emotion. He faced it. He called anger a brief lunacy and warned, no plague has cost the human race more dearly. But he didn't mean we should become emotionless. What the Stoics offered wasn't emotional suppression, it was emotional clarity. Anger as a trigger, not a truth. Picture this: you're in traffic, someone cuts you off. You slam the brake, you feel that instant jolt in your body, heat in your face, tension in your jaw. Now pause, what caused the anger? Was it the act of being cut off? Or was it the deeper narrative? That person disrespected me. I matter less. People shouldn't treat me this way. This is what Stoics call the interpretation gap, the space between what happens and how we define it. Epictetus, another Stoic master, said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. That space between stimulus and response is where freedom lives. The concept of emotional threshold. Let's introduce a technical term from emotional philosophy: the emotional threshold. This refers to the point where a person's internal regulation system breaks down and a feeling turns into an impulse. Think of it like a thermometer. At 70 degrees, you're annoyed. At 85, you're tense. At 100, you explode. Now, some people have a very low threshold. A single word can set them off. Others endure a lot before they react, but when they do, it's volcanic. What Stoicism trains is not the removal of feeling, the raising of the emotional threshold through reason, reflection, and inner distance. Seneca once wrote, the greatest remedy for anger is delay. Not avoidance, delay. A moment long enough to ask, is this reaction mine or just a reflex? Silence as discipline or as fear. Let's challenge the idea that silence is always noble. Many mistake silence for composure, but sometimes silence is just paralysis. Fear dressed up as patience. Imagine someone speaks over you in a meeting. You stay quiet, not because you're wise, but because you're scared of being disliked. You rationalize it later. I'm above that. But deep down, your silence wasn't a choice. It was an avoidance of discomfort. That's not Stoicism. That's suppression. The Stoic doesn't stay silent to be polite. He chooses when to speak with timing, courage, and poise. Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor and practicing Stoic, didn't retreat from conflict. He ruled an empire, made hard decisions, and still wrote in his, if you're distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. That means anger isn't always wrong, but uncontrolled anger is always dangerous. When is anger useful? So, is there such a thing as righteous anger? Yes, but it requires discernment. Let's say someone violates a boundary. You feel disrespected, unseen, insulted. Your body responds. Heartbeat accelerates, muscles tighten. You want to speak or even shout. This is what psychologists might call a fight or flight trigger, but what philosophy calls moral dissonance. You're not just mad, you feel like something important was breached. In this moment, your values are at stake, and anger becomes a signal, not a weapon. This is where the Stoic makes a different choice. I do not react to protect my ego. I respond to defend what matters. The middle way between explosion and suppression. Let's be honest, Both emotional explosion and total suppression are easy. One gives you a temporary release, the other gives you the illusion of control. But both are reactive, neither is conscious. The harder path, the middle way, is to feel anger fully and still choose your action, not from wounded pride, not from fear of judgment, but from a centered will. That's what the Stoics aimed for, and that's what modern emotional intelligence is rediscovering. It's the ability to say, yes, I'm angry, but that doesn't mean I'll scream. That doesn't mean I'll disappear. It means I'll listen, learn, and lead myself through it. Practical Stoic practice for anger. Here's something you can actually do. Pause the body. Don't trust thoughts in the first 10 seconds of a trigger. Name the emotion. Not, I'm furious, but I feel anger arising. Ask the deeper question, what is this anger trying to protect? Decide if action is needed now or later. Speak only when your voice no longer trembles. Part 2. Anger, Identity, and the Existential Dilemma. Let's begin with a different kind of question. Who are you when you're angry? Not what do you feel, but who do you become? Because anger, more than almost any other emotion, reveals your inner construction. Not just what you believe, but what you expect, what you demand, and most of all, what you cannot tolerate being questioned. The self as a story, December. Soren Kierkegaard, the father of existentialism, once said, "The self is a relation which relates itself to its own self." What does that mean? It means that your identity isn't a fixed thing. You are not a title or a role or a belief. You are a dynamic relationship between who you are now and who you're trying to become. And anger often arises in that fragile space. When someone contradicts your values, when the world refuses to mirror back the image you've carefully curated, when you say to yourself, I'm a calm person, but someone pushes you beyond calm, and now you're forced to renegotiate who you are. Anger disrupts the self. It tears through the masks. It demands a confrontation. But are you brave enough to look at what it reveals? Sartre and the Weight of Freedom. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." And here's the twist. We often use anger to escape that freedom. It's easier to say, he made me angry, than to say, I allowed myself to become this. Sartre called this bad faith, a form of self-deception. When we pretend that our emotional reactions are not choices, but inevitable consequences of others' actions. But if you are always reacting, then who are you? Where is your center? In existential terms, true authenticity means owning your inner world, even the chaos. It means realizing, I am not just the effect of my environment, I am the cause of my becoming. So the question becomes, are you angry because something true was violated? Or because you can't bear to admit that your identity is more fragile than you thought? Nietzsche and the will to power. Now let's shift to Friedrich Nietzsche. Often misunderstood as a philosopher of chaos or dominance, Nietzsche was actually obsessed with something deeper, becoming what you truly are. He spoke of the will to power, not as domination over others, but as the inner force to transcend your own limits, to shape your own being. And in this context, anger is not weakness unless it controls you. Nietzsche writes, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded." That line hits hard, because in a moment of rage, who's commanding you? Is it your wounds, your pride, your inner child who was never heard? Or is it your higher self, emerging through the fire? Nietzsche didn't ask us to suppress our instincts. He asked us to refine them, to become strong enough to choose when and if to act. The fire of the authentic self. We live in a time when expressing raw emotion is marketed as being real. Speak your truth, don't hold back, say it how it is. But here's the danger. Sometimes what we call truth is just trauma with a microphone. Sometimes we're not speaking from clarity, but from accumulated resentment, from ego, from fear, from the parts of us that were never taught how to sit with pain without weaponizing it. And in those moments, anger becomes a mask, not a mirror. Emotional sobriety and existential courage. Let me introduce another technical term, emotional sobriety. It's a term used in psychology to describe the ability to feel fully without being driven blindly. It's what Viktor Frankl referred to when he said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Emotional sobriety is what bridges Stoic restraint and existential freedom. It doesn't deny anger. It just doesn't serve it blindly. It asks, what is this anger trying to protect? Is it coming from my values or my vanity? Am I using it to move forward or just to prove I'm right? And most of all, who do I become when I stay angry? When silence is a lie, let's be careful not to swing too far in the other direction. Because just as anger can be fake authenticity, silence can be fake wisdom. There are moments in life, maybe in relationships, in work, in society, when not speaking is betrayal, when staying quiet is just another mask, worn to avoid discomfort. True authenticity is not loud, it is not quiet, it is aligned. And sometimes alignment demands that you speak, not to destroy, not to win, but to reaffirm who you are. And that's the deepest expression of anger, when it's not about dominance, but about dignity. Part 3, Anger, Silence, and the Choice to Become So. When should you get angry? And when should you stay silent? We've explored the Stoic answer, the existential challenge, the emotional mechanics beneath the flame. But now we face the harder question. Who do you want to be on the other side of your anger? Because anger is not a mistake, it's a message. But like all messages, it must be read with care, not shouted, not swallowed, understood. When silence becomes strength. Let's return to the Stoic view one last time. Seneca did not ask us to repress, he asked us to outgrow the impulse, to become so grounded in reason that the winds of insult or offense no longer move us. To be even-minded is the greatest virtue. Seneca. This does not mean you stay silent in the face of injustice. It means you do not waste your fire on shadows. You do not burn your time and energy on offenses that do not touch your deeper self. Silence in this sense is not absence. It is presence. It is the inner stillness that no chaos can control. And when you do speak, you speak not to lash out, but to illuminate. When anger becomes sacred. But then there are moments where silence betrays you. Moments when your truth has been buried beneath politeness, passivity, or fear. Moments when your boundaries are crossed again and again, and you begin to disappear. That is when anger becomes sacred, not as an outburst, not as a weapon, but as a force of reclamation, a remembering. You are not here to be pleasing. You are not here to be quiet, if quiet means losing your soul. There is a version of anger that comes not from ego, but from alignment. It says, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, and I will no longer be invisible. Controlled fire versus wildfire. Let me be clear, not all anger is created equal. There is wildfire reaction, chaos, destruction, and there is controlled fire, heat with direction, flame with purpose. Wildfire burns bridges, controlled fire clears a path. When you speak from controlled fire, your words carry weight, not wounding. You don't shout, and yet everyone hears you. Because your voice comes not from the surface, but from the depth of your truth. The mirror of anger. Anger is also a mirror. It shows you what you value, what you fear, where you are still attached to how others see you. Carl Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Anger, when examined, shows you the parts of yourself you've refused to face. Your shadow, your unmet needs, your unlived truths. But if you are brave, and I believe you are, you can sit with the flame. You can ask, is this anger coming from my deepest values, or just from a wound I haven't healed? That question changes everything. The final choice, become the philosopher of your own fire. This is what it means to become your own philosopher. To stop obeying your emotion like a servant, to stop rejecting it like a threat, and instead, to invite it to the table. To listen, to question, to lead. Because the most dangerous anger is unconscious, but the most powerful anger is owned. And when you can feel it, hold it, and then choose who you become with it, that is real power. Not the power to dominate, but the power to integrate. That's where Stoicism meets Existentialism. That's where silence becomes art and anger becomes transformation. Call to action, a philosopher's invitation. If this conversation stirred something in you, if it made you pause, reflect, if it reminded you of a moment where you stayed silent when you should have spoken, or where you reacted and lost yourself in the heat, then this is your invitation. Not just to reflect, but to redefine. Leave a comment below. When did silence cost you? When did anger teach you something about your truth? Who do you want to become in the fire? And if you're walking this road of self-knowledge, discipline, and inner strength, subscribe. Because this channel isn't just about ideas, it's about awakening the thinker inside you. The one who doesn't follow blindly. The one who sits with pain, not to suffer, but to learn. The one who sees anger, not as a failure, but as fuel, for wisdom, for action, for becoming. Because in the end, the question isn't, should I be angry? The question is, can I remain whole in the fire?